Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. So this time we got a bit of stuff about the election. Obviously happened on Tuesday and is still going on. They're still counting the votes in a bunch of districts in California. They're still counting them in Florida. And just this evening, and over the past few hours, the margins have been getting narrower and narrower and narrower in California, and I believe they are headed for a recount in both of the Senate race and the governor's race.
In Florida?
In Florida, yes. Kristen Sinema in Arizona has just pulled ahead of Mary McSally, something McSally. It's anybody's guess where those ones will land up. But so far, according to the, just checking the New York Times results page here, the Democrats have gained 30 seats. And there are still like about 10 or 11 that are still being counted. And the Democrats are leading in about 5 or 6 more of those. So we're looking at 36, 37 seats that they've gained. So huge sweep for them at the House level. Historically speaking, given the size of the Republican majority, which was not that big, the strong economy, which is, I would say, stronger than it's been, especially relative to the horrible background conditions that have persisted since 2008. Best economy since the late 90s, I would say, over the last year. And especially in just even the months before the election, things really trended up pretty strongly. Wages are growing strongly in nominal terms, so people are getting pay raises. The fraction of the prime working age population with a job is like squarely in kind of historically pretty good territory. Inflation is zip. Unemployment is 3.7%. It's lower than it's been in like 40 years or something. And I think that still understates the amount of slack there is left in the economy. And nevertheless, that's a low unemployment rate. And still, Republicans got absolutely smashed. I think the closest comparison, you look at 2010 when Republicans won the House of Representatives from the Democrats, and there they won like 60 seats or something like that. Like it was a huge victory. But key differences there. Number one, Democrats were sitting on a wave election from the previous year, so they had a huge majority that had a lot of very weak seats in it. And number two, more importantly by a lot, is that the economy was terrible. Unemployment was 9.8%, I believe, in November 2010. The foreclosures were cresting. It was really, really, really bad. All those indicators I mentioned previously were absolutely in the toilet, like historic lows in the post-war era. And that's when, you look at history, that's when wave elections happen. They happen when the economy is in the crapper. That's what happened in 1932. That's what happened in 1874, 1896. There's a really bad recession during the election. That's usually what does it. But here we have a wave election that I would say is like, I think it's the 6th biggest wave election since the end of World War II, and it happens in a really strong economy. So basically, the Trump Republican Party is not popular. So In the Senate, though, Republicans made some gains. They knocked off Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. They knocked off Claire McCaskill in Iowa. They knocked out Joe Donnelly in Indiana. And they maybe knocked off Bill Nelson in Florida. Though, as I said before,
We'll see.
It's
getting closer.
Yeah, that looked to be a sure thing, but now it's going to a recount, so we don't know. And yeah, Arizona.
Did you
go ahead?
Did you mention the recount for the gubernatorial race in Georgia?
Oh yeah, that one too. So yeah, governor's races. Democrats gained 7 seats. They gained them in Nevada, New Mexico, Kansas, Illinois, Wisconsin. Yes,
huge.
Scott Walker finally went down. This ham motherfucker finally got what was coming to him, which was.
Did you see the AFL-CIO? I don't know if I think there were memos about Scott Walker over the years, and they were like one line: Scott Walker is a national disgrace, and then I think now the one that came out is Scott Walker was a national disgrace. It's like, or he's still a disgrace, but he's no longer national.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that gives you a good sense of the depth of bitterness that is felt among working people, organized labor for this guy who has just been an absolutely fanatical, assassin of the working class in Wisconsin. And he finally, this Tony Evers guy who beat him is a pretty milquetoast, total non-entity. Nobody really paid attention to him before the election, but he... it was sufficiently. I mean, I'm sure he worked pretty hard, but he didn't get anything like Beto O'Rourke got, in terms of attention. But it was just, it's like, okay, he's good enough. Whatever, can't be, got to be better than this guy. Oh, and also in Maine, they beat that psycho Paul LePage is no longer governor of Maine.
Guy was super crazy. He's still super crazy.
Yeah. And so they're headed for a recount in Georgia where Stacey Abrams was locked in a battle with Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp notoriously doing stuff that, you basically would associate with like Eastern Bloc pseudo-democracies where he was the candidate for the election and running the election as the Georgia Secretary of State. And he was just flagrantly cheating. Some of his efforts to like disenfranchise Democrats, I think, were stopped by the federal courts and such. But it's like you don't even bother to pretend. Did
you see that he stepped down now?
Yeah, finally. Yeah, it's something he could have done. Even if you didn't step down as Secretary of State, you could just say you were recusing yourself from any election-related matters, which if anyone had even the slightest whiff of respect for the norms of democracy would have done immediately, if not resigned. But Republicans cheat, and this is classic Jim Crow shit, And even that, is really close. Just looking at the, so Brian Kemp. They're within like a 1.5 basically, and I think the news was as of this evening it's going to it's going to a runoff. That's right, because
not a recount, a runoff.
That's
a runoff
right.
On December 4th
because he didn't get
50%.
That's right. You have to get a majority, and if nobody gets a majority, then you have a runoff election.
And it's because some third candidate
libertarian
took or something. Yeah.
Ted Metz.
So libertarians are good for something. That's good.
That's right. They are. It's funny, you hear liberals complaining about the Green Party all the time. And I think that, like, in many cases, in terms of just like pure political tactics, what the Green Party spends its time doing in conducting very expensive litigation to stay on the ballot in all 50 states is kind of not worth doing. But at the same time, there's also other, there's like the Constitution Party, the Libertarian Party, and they're hemorrhaging votes from the right as well. And those, I think what it goes to show, and why I think it's very dumb to complain about the Green Party not voting for Democrats, is because the types of people that vote for the Green Party they're people who are so dissatisfied with American democracy that they basically
stay home.
Yeah, they regard the Democratic Party as like irredeemably corrupt.
Yes. Yes, they would for the most part rather stay home than help the Democrats.
Yeah.
And also it does some work, right? Like more fringe parties do some work to put pressure on the two main parties and the shit two-party system that we have. That's one way to influence it and try to co-opt those fringes so they don't get too big to do the spoiler act. But there was a good response on Twitter that I saw to someone complaining about if we didn't have the Green Party, then there wouldn't be these obstacles for the Democratic Party. And the response by someone was, it would be really helpful to the Democratic Party if the Republican Party didn't exist. That would be a tremendous help. They would be like a great one-party system. They would never lose. And so I thought that was a great response because it just shows like you can't like erase the politics part of winning power, right? Like you have to win the votes,
Yeah, right. And the problem of third party like spoiling and splitting is really, I think, at bottom a reflection of our incredibly stupid and anachronistic system of government.
Yes.
Democracies only work if people have a moral, ethical, ideological sense that voting is a civic duty. Like you got to go and vote. You got to do it because you need to do it because it's your right as a citizen, blah, blah, blah. All those sorts of like romantic notions. Because if you're thinking about this in like rational terms, like in terms, or I should say economic rational terms, like is it worth me spending my time to go and wait in line and cast a ballot? Absolutely not. It is almost, what is the chance of your vote being the deciding one? 0 in almost every case. And so why bother? And
that's
when people make the argument, Dan Davies wrote a great post about this. When people make the argument against, to say like, even if you're a leftist, you should vote for Democrats on basically cynical tactical reasons. The most cynical tactical thing to do would be to not bother to vote at all, because your vote,
which a lot of people do,
literally doesn't matter in terms of like direct concrete effects. Obviously sometimes it does, and like there are very, very close elections sometimes. And I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. I'm saying that this is how the rationales conflict with each other.
The rationale. Yes.
Yeah. Because
the thing is, Ryan, and I guess I didn't realize I'd get into theory this quickly. I thought we were going to shoot the shit a bit about
we can do that.
The interpretation of what the results mean.
Go ahead.
That's what I do, though, right?
Yeah.
No, so you just got me going a bit about the kind of classical liberal economic rationalist ontology or picture of what the world is and how it operates, and it's pictured as a bunch of individuals that are atomistically apart, unrelated, unconnected from each other, and that would be true if that was the reality. But there is data even for these folks that shows that if you vote, there are kind of, I don't know if the cascade effect is the term for it, but there are correlations where 100 other people will vote if you vote. There's like some kind of network effect or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is we aren't existing and acting and thinking alone. We're parts of webs of interconnected relationships and communities, and the truth is that people are affected in groups, and they affect each other and what they do and what they think. So it's a silly way to think of it for the first in the first place, right? So that's true, but also there's a reason that Rousseau and the more communitarian or communal classical Republican political philosophers who focused on democratic like direct democratic ways of operating in the social contract, rather than kind of a Lockean individual oikos or household-based way of thinking through what makes a society and politics meaningful. There's a reason that they focus on kind of what Rousseau would call the general will, or cultivating an understanding of what you should do that serves the common good and what everyone should do that serves the common good. Apart from did we talk? I think we might have talked about the will of all versus general will. The will of all is just the aggregation of everyone's particular interest that they have for themselves. And so in the same way that if you thought of it that way, no one would want to pay taxes because in their interest, someone else should always pay the taxes.
Yeah.
But if you aggregated all of that, there'd be no fucking taxes. Nothing would be spent. No one would get any help. So the will of all is bad. And the general will is when you think of aligning your will with that which should be willed generally by all to serve the common good. And that's when you try to think in a way that's truly communal. And so, you know, that's where we have to find meaning, I think, in these kind of interpretations of the political results. So I went off in the theoretical deep end a little bit, but you can bring us back.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I that's absolutely right. And I think that concretely, if you know, when you're talking about designing political institutions, the way to allow the citizenry to express that general will in a much more sensible and, dare I say it, technocratically effective fashion is to have a multi-party parliamentary system, which is obviously a superior way to organize a country. And in that case, you know, you have your sort of left coalition and your right coalition, and people vote their conscience, and they can vote their conscience knowing that you're not doing a spoiler effect and that you're actually making a meaningful choice. And it's not just a two-party duopoly where your particular set of reasons is like basically forbidden structurally from having any effect, you know? Because that joke you said about, you know, one party state, I think it was Liz Bernick who made that joke. But, you know, it's funny, but at the you know, the reality at the in structural terms is that the United States is like a two-party state. Like more or less, you know, third parties exist in places with first past the post voting in Canada and the UK. It's just in the, you know, the US, third parties are basically legally harassed out of like actual political existence.
Right. Yeah, and I would even say that, look, when Noam Chomsky said a long time ago that there's only one party, the business party, but there are two wings of the business party, and it actually matters which wing, like people's lives are actually affected by which wing gets elected. I think that was a great way to put it. I think it's true that there's one party, it's the business party, and the business class, the donor class, is ultimately, right, the oligarchy is ultimately the one being served by our two political parties, right? But, you know, which wing of the business party gets elected actually tangibly changes the number of lives that get killed around the world in wars, although that's less of a difference seemingly than domestically and how we treat the poor and how we treat healthcare and so forth. But there is still, as we saw, I think, a strategic and not just a principled reason to not just vote for, say, the Democrats, but try to change who runs as a Democrat and to get like democratic socialists running and to show the world that expanding, as like Megan Day wrote this take in Jacobin, the midterms winners, losers, right? And
very Vox style of format. Yeah. It's a great article.
Yeah, but it's great. So, but she says, you know, political campaigns, quote, political campaigns are always either expanding or constricting the imagination of the public. And so that's true, right? So you can electorally also influence the extent to which one of those two parties specifically has the ability to change people's lives for the better and save lives and shift the ideology and try to maybe, even if it's going to be a two-party system, pull one of the parties a little bit further away from the interests of the oligarchs. That's worth doing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can, you know, I think that one reason that the United States is not, it still has meaningful democratic elements, whether we call it a democracy or not. There is an opportunity for meaningful political contestation within this sort of like this very loose jointed two-party structure. And in some ways, like the multi-party thing is happening within, the Democratic coalition. You sort of have like people who would be in the UK, like liberal Democrats, like Chuck Schumer, who are in there. And then you have people who would be, Labor Party, Jeremy Corbyn types of people also in there. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is officially won her election. She'll be going. Did you see this story, by the way? She apparently is like real.
Can't afford.
She's real broke. Yeah. She
has 3 months before she starts serving and gets paid by our federal government, and doesn't know if she can't wait. She has to wait to get a DC apartment for a couple months or so.
Yeah, this like, I mean, I laugh, obviously, like it's a very cute story. And I should say, she posted on Twitter that she's not in any danger of like, destitution or anything.
It's pretty illuminating that we haven't heard this from others. And look, it's already really difficult to run for office in this country because of the way that you have to either be like independently wealthy, not worry if you lose, having left a job, or you have to have some ability. It's yet another underappreciated, under-discussed obstacle to representatives actually being one of the masses rather than some elite who doesn't really need to work but just wants to aggregate wealth and power. So it's a nice story in the sense that it's good that there's somebody who a lot of people can relate to that is now in the halls of power.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and to turn back to my original point, though, that these parties are not like cast in stone. I'm thinking of the 1924 election. This is when
aren't we all?
Yes,
right?
It's one of my favorite elections. So this was when Calvin Coolidge won his full term because he took off. Coolidge obviously took, if you don't know the history, took office after Harding died in 1923. And so the Democrats ran John W. Davis, who is a Wall Street banker, very conservative. And so there was basically no difference at all between the parties. Oh, and also Bob La Follette ran. Bob La Follette Sr. ran in the Progressive Party. And I think he won one state. Yes, he did. He won just Wisconsin.
Good old Bob.
So anyways.
Way to go, Bob.
Yeah, so like you had a business capitalist conservative Calvin Coolidge and running against a business capitalist conservative John Davis. And Calvin Coolidge, because he was the incumbent, absolutely wiped the floor with him. It was like 54% to 28%. So 8 years after that, FDR is elected. And suddenly now you actually have something that is sort of, maybe you wouldn't call it like totally social democratic, but very, very, very hard swing to the left from the posture of 1924. And that, it was because there was a lot of politics happening in there, and the union people, the welfare people, everybody who argued for more progressive egalitarian politics, they basically took power in the highest levels of the party, and at the same time, these structures grew up which push the party to the left. Like these big unions who, put tons of pressure on FDR to do the things that he ended up doing.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it's, again, remember when I wrote something up and I sent to you on Ernst Bloch and process ontology and temporality and the way that we think of the past as mere trajectory, but Bloch shows that it's also rupture, but we forget about that part of the past and how there are these sharp changes from trajectory to rupture. And so when we look into the future, we kind of circumscribe our own limits of what's possible because we think that it has to just be on the same trajectory as what we imagine the past was. Remember that?
Sort of, I vaguely remember that. It's like a Stephen Jay Gould in a punctuated equilibrium.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think of it. But yeah, part of the problem we have before us is one of, Megan Day talked about political imagination, and a lot of people talk about, I tell my students we have to, we have the numbers. They have the power and the wealth, but we have the numbers. But the numbers only matter if you educate and motivate. And so we have to get people to care, get off the couch, not just vote, but organize. And, Dave Kibe talks about slack as a huge thing in politics. There's just a tremendous underappreciated amount of slack in the system and a lot of action that could be done. When you see victories like we see now, where, besides Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez winning, and really her victory was in the primary, but still she's now the youngest woman ever in the United States Congress, right? And
Is she youngest ever?
Yeah, I believe so. Pretty cool.
There's another woman who's just behind her, who's also 29, Abby Finkenauer.
Tremendous. I really do think that if the old people just died in power, that would do like 90% of the work.
Not the Supreme Court justices, though.
No.
RBG's got to cling to life for another few years.
We should rip out Dick Cheney's artificial heart and put it in her or something. I don't know. So, in any case, the point I was making is that Julia Salazar, right, is in the state senate, in the state senate in New York. Huge flip to the Democrats, but another Democratic socialist, and Franklin Bynum, who is Houston socialist judge, right?
Yeah, we got to get him on the
Democrat.
Podcast.
That would be great. I think that would be wonderful. We have to celebrate these victories to give the hope that the political imagination and will to change can keep moving in this direction. So, we have to remember that the past is also not what we think it was, that it can change drastically, that parties and ideologies can shift, and that we have agency in that. So,
yeah. This is to bring it back to this midterm election. You had these very charismatic folks running in Texas and Florida, Beto O'Rourke in Texas and Andrew Gillum in Florida. I think both of them really were very impressive political talents.
Yeah.
I think that Andrew Gillum is better in terms of politics. He made what seemed to me like a pretty clear tactical feint to the center, but he still ran a very solidly progressive campaign.
Yes.
And he is very, you watched him in the debates, you watched him during the election, and he was just a very able politician. He reminded me of watching Obama, not just because he's black, obviously, but just because like Obama's a magnificent political talent, really, really good. And
yes.
This struck me as similar. O'Rourke also quite solid. And I think the thing about O'Rourke in Texas, obviously he lost, but he got within what, 2%? Let me look at this.
Yes.
Yeah, 50.
Very, very close.
He got less than 3%. This was like 2.7%. Looks like, and in Texas that is huge. And he had coattails. at the local and the state level. So he brought in probably 2 or 3 new, like he flipped a couple of districts. He brought in some people, and he the whole Republican like judicial slate in Texas, in Houston and Dallas was wiped out, and so our that Burnham fellow is one of those people. I think, maybe he would have won without Beto, but like that you could clearly see across the state that these the effect of having a very charismatic, it was sort of a quasi-presidential effect, having a very charismatic, very, very popular, getting a lot of attention and money. He had a ton of fundraising. He brought some people along. I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's easy to get caught up in the fucking anti-democratic system we have is so frustrating, and the fact that the Senate got 9 to 10 million more votes for Democratic senators, and yet the Democrats didn't take an overall advantage in the Senate. And you can think of all these things, but at the same time, even given the voter suppression, even given the the anti-democratic obstacles, this does show a real strong, as you said, especially in the backdrop of the economy and all those comparative factors to previous elections, a strong leftist, I think specifically, influence and surge nationwide. You have ideological winners who supported Medicare for all. You have the huge victory with the amendment in Florida and other states, I believe, but Florida is the big one, where former felons are now enfranchised. So 1 million people that couldn't vote before now can vote.
Yeah, 40% of all the black men in Florida just got their voting rights back.
I mean, that's incredible. Just an incredible victory for democracy and for citizenship and for reversing some racist disenfranchising. So that's, I think, there's lots of micro analysis that can be done here and there, and it could have gone this way, it could have gone that way. But the big picture, I think, needs to consider that although there are these kind of alt-right populist strongholds and still some support for kind of Trump-style politics and policies, there is this thirst, I think, for lefty populism. Because I think that the Democrats that didn't do well are the ones that tacked to the center, tacked right. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this has been a subject for discussion. I'm not really convinced by either side.
Excellent. Well, that's a good place to start.
So to start with, so I think it's you can adduce evidence on either side of this debate. So you look at Claire McCaskill in Missouri. She's very moderate. She ran a right towards the end, especially, she broke against the caravan that Trump, was just constantly whipping up racist kind of exterminationist rhetoric about. Which, by the way,
she was strong on borders and strong on immigration. By the way, it was a very provincialist kind of campaign too, where she's like, "I love every part of Missouri," every corner of it.
Yeah. Oh yes, and by the way, the Trump has completely stopped paying attention to that, and so has the mainstream media. They've completely forgotten about it. It's just like Ebola in 2014. It was a convenient campaign prop, and now it's gone. But yeah, so she lost. Joe Donnelly, another conservative Democrat, lost. But Joe Manchin, who is probably the most conservative Democrat, he's running in a state that Trump won by 40 points, I think. He won, and it wasn't even very close. It was 56-43 or something like that. Joe, John Tester in Montana won. He is not. He's much more liberal than Manchin, but he's also not like a socialist by any stretch of the imagination.
Can we call Manchin Munchkin? I just kind of want to call him Munchkin.
You can, yeah.
And so Munchkin, though, unfortunately, might have been benefited from his bullshit Kavanaugh dance and ultimate support because of the, well, demographics in West Virginia, perhaps, of his support.
Yeah. But Tester voted against Kavanaugh and he won. Right. So my general takeaway. Oh wait, then there's one more data point here, which is the incredible success of lefty ballot initiatives. So yes, you had ballot initiatives to expand Medicaid in Idaho, I believe, and Utah, a number of conservative states.
Idaho, Nebraska, and Utah.
Yeah.
All expanded Medicaid.
Right. And then there's also medical marijuana initiatives, and those all passed. I think every one of them. Yeah, so we have a minimum wage increase in Missouri and Arkansas, expanded Medicaid in Utah, Nebraska, and Idaho. And as we said before, in Florida, we got voting rights to 1.2 million people, and then marijuana initiatives in a number of states as well. And so,
so you can vote high if you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these were in like a lot of very conservative states, and I think that. You had Michigan, Utah, and Missouri for marijuana. So not although it did fail in North Dakota, but the point being that you have these, you put lefty policies, most of them at least, like some carbon tax stuff did fail on the ballot. They do much better than actual Democratic candidates almost across the board. And I guess, like, my general takeaway is that if you're in an individual election, ideology is only sort of tangentially related to how well somebody does. Like, I think it does matter. You can't be too out of step with the background. Like in Tennessee, I think that Bredesen, what the hell is his name? The Democrat who was running for Senate.
Yeah.
Sorry for screwing up yet another pronunciation.
No, you have to. That is required.
Every episode, I got to do that. He said that he was going to vote for Kavanaugh, and that was just like I apparently just totally took the wind out of his sails in terms of organizing. And it was also a thing like, he's not in the Senate. He doesn't have to vote. He could have just kept his mouth shut. So, you have to be tactically savvy in that sense, to where if people are really, really energized about a certain thing, and Medicare for all, voting rights, maybe back in the day women's suffrage or something like that, like, you don't want to step afoul of that. But at the same time, I think that, like, candidate ability matters maybe quite a bit more than your explicit ideology in the moment.
Right. We've talked about it. And look, so there's a lot of interesting things that to read about this peculiar representative democracy that we have, right? This representative system. and it's explicitly not a democracy in any number of ways, right? So, like, if you think about, Bernard Manin, because it's a French name and I have to pronounce it. It's Manin. Manin. I don't know.
See what it's like.
Yeah, well, no, I think I did okay. So you're the one that has to totally screw it up. I can just,
Damn it.
get it slightly off. Yeah. No, so, So he writes about, in contrast to, say, ancient Athens, for example, where, did we ever talk about the attempted bombing in D.C. with the guy that that essentially wanted to bring attention to the ancient Greek way of doing democratic selection of representatives, or
I don't
of
think
the
I've
actual
heard of this.
Oh, really? Oh, this dude, I don't know how long ago it was, a month ago? He had a massive amount of explosives that he was going to set off on the mall, between the Capitol and the White House and so forth. Or you live in D.C., you know the mall. But that's not even what it's between. It's between the Capitol and the Washington Monument. That's the mall? What do I know?
The mall is between the Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol building.
The Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol. So
It's called being
so you should
patriotic.
look this up. Yeah. So he was prevented from setting off, I don't know if it was 200 pounds of explosives, some massive bomb. He had this purpose to bring attention to selection by lot, which is the way that he thinks democracy should work, like it did in ancient Athens, where your representatives are literally just, picked picked in a lottery. And instead of having elections and voting for people. Because this crazy guy is correct, actually, that true democracy looks something like that, where you have a willing pool of people who throw their hat in, or their name into the hat, and then it's just like, get in there and serve, and then come back out, and someone else get in there, and that's the people governing themselves, right? But to have elections is to already make it aristocratic. Because what an election is, by its very nature, is to say you're choosing. So you're choosing the best among the options. And of course, aristocracy comes from the Greek word ariston, which means the best. So rule by the best. And so in an election, just by its definition, whatever the election is, you are determining by some criteria who is best to serve. And once they are elected, you've basically stopped your participation in the democratic process, because your only function is essentially voting up or down, right? Every time there's an election, you vote up or down. And so the real power is in the hands of the people deemed the best by the people to shape legislation, to do anything they want. The only pressure on them is their anticipation of what they will think you would do once you look retrospectively at what they did in the next election and vote in your voting. And that is the only pressure. Everything else is in their hands. So it is fundamentally, right, not democratic in operation in all these ways. And there's other things, like you can put pressure by, the marches, and having other elite leaders pressuring them gives signals that when their turn to be voted up or down comes around, they might win or lose, right? But this is just a long-winded way of saying that we have to really be excited when these referendums or democratic will shining through actually happens, because for the most part, it's just this very attenuated influence that the people usually have in our system with who gets to run, what they do, and very often whether they stay in power or not. So,
yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a little bit more skeptical of referendums. I think that that type of direct democracy would maybe be just as vulnerable to capture by the elite interests as the kind we have now. In this system. So you're right. So anything, even if it's more democratic in its own right, which by definition, like a referendum is more democratic in its own right than electing some usually white dude to decide things for you. But that being said, in a system like this, and in capitalism, which of course, right, conditions our subjectivities, our interests, takes away our time, enervates us, and influences us through marketing, propaganda, et cetera, of course, that diminishes the popular will or ability to either shape what referenda
go up, and understanding whether they're good for the right, whether the actual general will is being served, involves education and any number of things. So that's true. So there has to be like a systemic change, in the political economy and the political structures before truly democratic will to serve the common good can be pervasive, right? So, but it's a long march towards that, right? And so there are places where we can celebrate when the outcome is in fact a good one, like the enfranchisement of 1 million and more people in Florida. But yeah, so like Brexit and any number of things you might say. But this is, though, an important thing to clarify, because you do get those that poo-poo. Like I haven't read it yet, but it was New Yorker magazine here. This the brand new New Yorker. Too much democracy. Were we better off when the parties had more control over candidates? That's literally right the latest issue.
Yeah, this
I
is the big hot take among political scientists recently. The Democracy for Realists crowd said democracy is bad because voters are stupid.
So I want to guard against that
Yeah.
framing as well.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think that's, the objection that I would have to maybe certain types of referendum. Like, I think people could make a good choice. They could make a meaningful choice on marijuana or, felon reenfranchisement and so forth. I think that if you get into more complicated questions, then it's like, can people really make a choice, that meaningful choice on something that they maybe don't understand? And in that case, like, delegation makes sense in terms of where, like, the party isn't going to choose for you, ideally at least. The party is going to represent your interests by, like, having a sort of bureaucracy that can litigate these questions. And you pick the party that you think is associated with your interests, and then they do the complicated and often very annoying work of figuring out what the optimal tax rate on aluminum imports should be. And that, because I don't think ordinary people, I'm a political journalist, and I don't know what the optimal tax rate on imported aluminum should be. Like, I think that would...
Well, don't forget that, like, what gets on a ballot, what becomes of political concern such that it becomes open to referendum vote, needs to be investigated too, because like we have these proxies, as you say, that are supposed to represent certain interests, not just in government, but whether it's the ACLU or other proxies that do help your average Joe Schmo who's working all the time and can't stay up on all the latest, like you say, technocratic insights. But the question is, like, if those in certain groups of expertise are suggesting that there's a problem or something could really be helpful, then I think people could get informed by those groups in a way that they could be informed voters for such a thing. But usually, like, most of the fundamental needs that people have don't have to do with fucking, like, aluminum. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. There doesn't need to... So, like, if somebody is trying to put on the ballot something really obscure and weird, maybe there might be special interests behind that. Like, moneyed interests might be interested in kind of, like, hoodwinking you into thinking this is in your favor and making some convoluted issue something they can pull, a fast one on you with. Whereas for the most part, right, like, the things that really matter aren't that complicated, and actually you're going to find out about if you have those proxies to inform you, and if you get informed on your own right. Like, Jeff Spross was just tweeting, I think, about how he thinks maybe Obamacare, if done a certain way, could have possibly worked in a functional way to be very helpful. But at the same time, when you have much simpler, it's like Occam's razor in a way for policy. Something like Medicare for All is better, and much simpler. So why go the convoluted route? Mm-hmm. And the answer usually is there are special interests behind the convoluted route.
I think, these are good points. And I'm a bit skeptical of, like, referendums, like, I think there is some there's like just allowing the government to govern is probably better if you have like a proper democracy. But you know, you have to play with the hand you're dealt for the most part. And no matter how many tries it takes to overturn, Prop 13 in California, which basically like guts their ability to tax property, we're just gonna have to work that out. But on the question of like who wins and who doesn't in this election and in other elections, I think that, as I was saying before, like I think that the specific ideology of the candidate matters a lot less than people tend to think in both directions. So, like I see a lot of lefties trying to like pick out like the most lefty candidates who won. And I see a lot of centrists trying to pick, it's like, oh, all the centrist candidates won. It's like, I don't think that's really true in either way. I think that that in terms of any individual election, it's down to the quality of the candidate, the sort of background conditions, the fundraising, and like what sort of like other institutions you might be able to mobilize in your behalf. And that's not to say that ideology doesn't matter. I think ideology comes in when it's time, if you're a governing party and it comes time for you to defend your record, so like most concretely and most obviously in the case of recent history in 2010, as we were saying before, unemployment was 9.8% in November 2010. And that's why Democrats got their asses handed to them. And the reason for that was because they made the stimulus too small. They didn't add more stimulus after it was obvious that the first one wasn't big enough. And in fact, I just learned this the other day. They didn't even do a reconciliation bill in 2011 when they could have basically set the economy up a reconciliation bill in 2010 for fiscal year 2011. So where they could have just like larded it up with a lot of gimmies, basically because like Obama didn't want it, the Blue Dogs didn't want it, and everyone was worried about the budget deficit, and the result was all those people lost. Obama didn't lose, but the Blue Dogs got wiped out.
Look, here's something I want to push back a little bit and see if we can sort something out, because on the one hand, I think it's obviously correct that most people don't have well sorted out political philosophies and ideologies where they, can rationally distinguish between the, the genealogy of ideas giving rise to why this candidate's views differ from the opposing party's candidate, and this explains, for example, why there's a crossover between, Bernie and Trump supporters in 2016, but also why you have people flipping from Obama to Trump, and why you have any number of inconsistent views. You have people who hate government spending but want all the entitlement programs. You have people who, back in the day during the Tea Party rallies, get your government hands off my Medicare, right? So you have a lot of confusion, a lot of people who don't have consistent or coherent ideological views or understandings, or aren't necessarily committed to one or the other, and these background conditions matter a lot. Okay. On the other hand, since the Reagan Revolution, neoliberalism has subconsciously permeated the minds of like so many people that whether they realize it or not, they live and breathe a logic and a moral logic of neoliberalism. That's starting to abate a little bit, but like the greed is good, the free market is good, the way to allocate resources without the government involvement is good. Like a lot of these priors seep in on both parties and independents alike. And you have the confusion where you get your government hands off my Medicare because they don't even have the cognitive dissonance, because they don't have the knowledge sometimes to know that like there is that conflict between the ideology they're spouting subconsciously about the government being the problem and this thing that they like, that they know is good in real life. So I think like it's also true that there is a power to ideology, which is about both theory and a movement to certain types of action, which can be action to defend the market against government, or to defend wars because, so ideology can be very powerful. And I think it would be a mistake to cede the battle for ideological influence just because in any given particular race or wave midterm election, it might have more to do with a candidate's particular skills or the state it's in or the background conditions. Like what we can control, right, besides finding talented politicians, is aligning what people think their interests are with a coherent way to make sense of them that fits the leftist ideological framing, because we think that framing is the actual proper way to understand the problems that are causing so much suffering and the potential solutions.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't, I just want to avoid the the tendency, which I think is very prevalent among all political traditions, to
confirmation bias?
Yeah, to just be like, my way is the only way to win. And I don't think that's true. Nevertheless, I definitely do think that in the moment that we are in, you look at where in a case where I would say like neoliberalism is certainly on the decline, like it is not paying the dividends and is unpopular. Like, very striking fact about the 2018 campaigns was that Republicans just straight up lied about their healthcare position. They're like, we're going to defend protections for pre-existing conditions. And, Trump literally said at one point, I believe, I'll stick this in if I can, Democrats are going to destroy Obamacare.
The Democrat plan would obliterate Obamacare.
That's the level of like cognitive, like
double speak.
Up is down, yeah, double speak that they are at. And I think that if you're, in a case where we were talking about Gramsci before, in a case where like people are very confused, they are looking for leadership, they're looking for confidence. And I think whereas, a lot of lefties like myself sort of projected their own ideology onto Obama, who is a very effective politician, but actually
I did it too at the outset. I did it too.
Quite conservative in terms of his actual beliefs. At the same time, if you are someone who can, you can articulate, you can understand what people are thinking. You can articulate an explanation for why it's happening, and you can show people a path to fix that. I think that's a very powerful, that's a very
it is
strong potential card to play. I don't think it's dispositive. It's not an automatic thing, but I think it's something that does matter.
I agree. It's incredible to me, and again, this is how you view history, I suppose, that Bernie Sanders did what he did, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did what she did. The notion that being principled and lefty harms you necessarily is the thing that I think is important to debunk. Because in other words, if any number of ways get you to victory, why not use the principled ways, right? Like, why not go with what's actually good for people? And the thing that I want to push against, I suppose, is this notion, and you get it from the fucking, like, technocratic, liberal pundits and so many others that say, well, I don't know about Bernie's Medicare for All plan. Show me the details. I don't know if the details are going to work. And just fucking nitpick the shit out of, right, something that hasn't even been like enacted, or debated. Like it's just aborting the idea for something great before it's even had a chance to come to life, because of this fixation on the technocratic way of knowing what's best, right, in this very granular sense. So I just want that granular focus, which has, Obama written all over it and just tinkering with the levers of government and the experts being the meritocratic class. I just want that to not win the ideological war in terms of what kind of candidates can run and the way that they run their campaigns. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think it is fair to say that not only are leftist candidates at least doing like as average, like they're doing across the board, like about as average as well as the sort of like more conservative candidates. The rest of the party is following them. Like Democrats are talking about Medicare for all. Even Democrats who don't support Medicare for all being accused of supporting Medicare for all by their Republican opponents, it's not having any effect. Medicare for all is broadly popular. There's polls that it's like 70% of the population and like over half of Republicans in a poll I saw the other day support Medicare for all. And I guess that, it's like that. I want to guard against wishful thinking, I guess. I don't think it's an automatic process that the leftiest candidate will always win automatically. I think that talent and ability really does matter, and I think it's something that Bernie has. It's something that AOC has. But it's it's something that you have to work and you have to cultivate. At the same time, I think it definitely is the case that that's where the fervent organizers are, the people who will knock on doors for you, for the most part. And I also think that in terms of, maybe somewhat ironically, the technocratic details of how American society has evolved over the last decade, lefty solutions are inarguably the superior solutions. Neoliberalism has been an absolute disaster for this country in terms of not just in terms of like equity and like, poverty and stuff, in terms of raw growth and output and like your cynical business type of stuff. Like profits are high, but growth has been in the toilet, absolutely fucked by austerity and the financial crisis and deregulation. You have lots of companies making money by basically pillaging the rest of society, and the economy as a whole is in terrible shape. Even now, it's still not doing well. We're behind $3 trillion compared to where we would have been without the financial crisis, and we could fix that today if we wanted to with stimulus policy.
Right. No, that's right, and it reminds me. So the flip side of the GOP, the Republicans, benefiting from being incompetent and terrible in government because their whole political philosophy suggests that government is terrible and not good. And so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy when they have power and just confirm that government is terrible, right? Yeah. The flip side of that is if actual lefties and not neoliberals gain power and start instituting things like Medicare for all, that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy about the ways in which we can affirmatively help people through these ideological shifts. And that will further... So again, the whole notion that you can win in any number of ways is only true insofar as, like, as far as people are concerned, nobody's done fuck all for them. Whether it's, and that's why Bernie and Trump are so popular, because, like, the establishment of both parties seemingly failed so many people in so many ways that they're like, doesn't seem to me that there's any particular way to go that's going to work. And so if we can show that there is, in fact, a certain set of ideas that do work, like when you actually help people and take care of their needs, that itself could become a self-fulfilling prophecy that gains more and more support.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, in fact, what happened in, in the 1930s and 1940s. People were adrift. They were rootless. They were up for grabs to some degree, and they were brought into a sort of broad center-left coalition by the success of the New Deal as a political project.
As Spross said when he was on the podcast last, even the Jonathan Chaits of the world, if they really think that the data and the evidence is how they should decide things, well, what if the data says socialism is what works well? then even the Chates have to become socialists, don't they?
Well, they would if they actually listen to the data, but I think it's...
Or if they listen to the podcast, maybe. Mm-hmm. Well,
they should, yeah. We got to get Chait on here.
Let's do it.
See if we can come to blows.
Everybody tweet Chait and tell him to come on the podcast. If all of you do it, every single one, it might happen.
If you're verified, he doesn't read his non-verified mentions.
He has a representative democracy, elitist, aristocratic view of Twitter.
He muted me when I said he should be cleaning toilets instead of writing articles, which is maybe a little bit offensive to the janitors out there. No offense to janitors.
That's right. No janitors should have to work with Chait. That's true. That's a good point. Did I just ruin the chance that he would come on? Damn it.
Way to go.
You know,
we were that close.
What are you going to do? Well, we went live, and this is what happens when you go live.
No. We'll do it live. Fuck it.
So,
yeah.
What are you going to do? So,
but
a lot to talk about on a continual basis, but I think that was a pretty good crack attempt to make meaning of the midterms, you know?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's a good first start. And we'll definitely be discussing this in the future.
Yes. So take heart, take hope, and get organizing, folks. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you very, very shortly. This was a special live episode, so we'll see you in a few.
Alrighty. Later on.
Bye.